Make America Great Again and America First, and even accusing China of raping America are statements that we'd expect from Donald Trump. But the Biden administration has continued on with Donald Trump's tariffs on China products, and on May the 14th have just announced a raft of new tariffs on certain products such as steel and aluminum, medical devices, EVs, lithium-ion batteries, solar cells, and some others, which aim to combat what a lot of people in America are saying are unfair Chinese business practices, where they are flooding the market with cheap exports that American businesses cannot compete with. This, of course, means that the imbalance in trade continues, which many people in America would like to see end. Let's not forget as well that there's an election coming up in November, so it may suit President Biden to be tough on China. But if you are an American importer and you're buying from China, how does this affect you? And also, what about the relationship between America and China? Is it set to grow frostier? This is what we'll be discussing today in episode 217 of the podcast. You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sophie's Group. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. Adrian from Sophie's here. Renaud, our CEO, joins me. Hi, Renaud.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm well. We've got decent late spring / early summer weather in the UK now. I know everybody loves a weather update, but it's a very British thing, isn't it, to talk about the weather? But it's finally happened, so I can see some sun in the sky. So that's definitely reasons to be cheerful.
Wow. Yeah. And here, South China, actually the weather is quite nice. We are sort of between the heavy rains of a couple of weeks ago, and the strong heat that was here like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and probably going to come back soon. But this week we're kind of enjoying nice weather.
Yeah, if you're going to head over to China in the summer to go see us or see suppliers, just get ready because it's pretty hot and humid in South China at least.
Right.
Speaking of people that come and see us, we do have plenty of American customers, and there was some interesting news this week, and we're recording the week starting the 13th of May, and the US Trade Representative has just released some new China tariffs after the statutory 4-year review. All of that sounds a bit jargony, right? But what we're trying to get to the bottom of in this episode is, what does it mean? And I guess especially for American customers who are buying products or materials or components from China, what sort of impact might this have on them? I guess that largely depends on what they're buying, and we're going to talk about the types of products and items that are going to be hit by, further tariffs, right? So to take it back to the beginning, though, this did not start in May 2024. This started in 2018 when President Trump was still in office, and he brought in the original set of China tariffs, right, which I think they call Section 301 tariffs, if I'm correct.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would argue that it started much earlier, when Clinton administration in the 90s said, okay, let's try to open things up for China as much as we can. Let's make and the government at the time in China, especially the Prime Minister Zhu Rongji, was working on really modernizing the economy and so on. And the whole idea was to open up the economy as much as possible and really integrate China into the global economy, and that good things would come out of that and so on. Okay. And this whole idea, was still mainstream like 20 years ago. 20 years later, and under the Obama administration, even until Trump came, and with his very, how to say, make America great again, America first, very transactional thing. Say, well, just looking at the numbers, there's a lot of there's a transfer of a lot of money every year out of the US and into China, and they have a surplus, and this is just not acceptable, right? It started from a very basic kind of, kindergarten level kind of comparison, saying, well, we pay you more than you pay us, that's not really balanced. And now that maybe that's it, right? And 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 of course, well, why the reasoning also went, why would we give preferential treatment to China when it's actually now a fully developed economy, and they send astronauts into space, and they do all kinds of things that really baffle the rest of the world. Well, um, it's actually not a how to call that, less advanced economy, right? It's not a poor country, right? Just go to
Mm.
the big cities in China, you will see that it's pretty obvious. So um, a number of things together, yeah, came together, and then they enacted these tariffs, and they say, well, we cannot lose at this game because we buy from them so much more than they buy from us. So let them retaliate. And at one point, there's like phase one, phase two, phase three. They will see very fast that if they overplayed their hand and they retaliate, tit for tat, just the way the Chinese government usually does and the way they initially did, well, then phase two will come into play, and then phase three will come into play, and then they will run out of stuff to add tariffs on, again, because we buy so much more than them, right? So we cannot lose at this game.
Mm.
And it kind of work in a sense. I mean, obviously, everybody looks at statistics in a different way, but overall, it seems like nobody's saying that it was mostly detrimental, okay, on the US side. And they tend to think that there was more damage done on the Chinese side and not much damage done on the US side. Well, especially looking at, their constituents and the voters and things like that, not necessarily a bunch of companies in Los Angeles or New York City importing a bunch of products. That's a little bit lower on their list of priorities.
Mm.
So the general consensus has been, okay, this has been a good decision and we should do more of it. And there's a lot of people in the US who think that way. And by the way, it was not only on China. They also came down hard on, on the Koreans, on the Europeans, etc. Right? But China was also politically a signal, right? A symbol. Let's
Yeah.
hit China because by the time it was 2018, 2019, in the US, China in general had a relatively bad image. Okay, and both the Democrats and the Republicans just wanted to, wanted to hit China. I mean, that's just what it was, right? So that's sort of the context yeah that led to these tariffs announced in 2018, and then the general consensus that, hey, once the Democrats come to power, so that's Biden, why would they remove the tariffs? And of course, Biden did not touch it,
Yeah.
right? Because if you remove the tariffs, then it would be too easy for Trump and the political adversaries to say, "Hey guys, you guys are soft on China. Oh, did you get bought by China? What's
Mm.
going on?" Right? So they couldn't really do that, and there was not much pressure anyway to remove them.
Okay, so why now?
What the big thing that has happened? Well, there's two big things that have happened, I think, since then. Or three big things. Okay. Well, one was the inflation, of let's say, last year. So of course they could not put tariffs in place when there's strong inflation, because then everybody would say, "Oh, it's your fault. You kind of fan the flames of inflation, and you make it much worse," and so on. So I think the timing could not be, late 2022 or 2023. Okay, that's one thing.
Mm.
The other big thing that happened was COVID and the um, the general awakening that, oh my God, we don't have production of masks here. Oh my God, we don't have, there's a lot of things we don't make here. Okay. And there's certain things that for the purposes of national security and just, being able to stand on our own 2 feet, we should make in our country and in, let's say, maybe more friendly countries. Okay.
Yep.
Because the US is kind of projecting themselves in a sort of a prolonged and maybe a deep conflict with China. So they don't see China as a very friendly country now. So they'd rather buy from more friendly countries over which they have more control, maybe, right?
Mm.
Or ideally domestically. Right? So that really turned people's heads. And oh, okay, that's the reality. That's a problem, right? And same thing in Europe. Just the same thing in Europe. A lot of governments vowed to to act and gain their whatever strategic autonomy back and so on and so forth. And very little has been done. Okay, but as we will see with these new tariffs, well, they're doing something. Okay, and that in part led to the IRA, which they call the Inflation Reduction Act, which was not that much about inflation, but was really a way to distribute a lot of subsidies to kickstart some industrial projects, if possible,
Mm.
mega projects to make, how to say, to pump up the green economy.
Hmm.
So talking about battery factories and solar panel factories, but also microprocessor batteries. They really want to regain the edge there because, well, um, they say they invented the semiconductor and they had the lead and they had a great company in Intel and some others. And now the most advanced, the leading edge semiconductor factories are in Taiwan and in South Korea. How come? So they really want to lead here because this also has implications on the military field, right? So
Yeah.
they did that. They are pumping a lot of subsidies into the economy. Okay, and now these tariffs come up and they really try to how to say to keep the momentum going. Okay, we
Mm.
have these vast subsidies. We're trying to regain a strategic autonomy on the leading edge semiconductors and things like that. We're trying to be self-sufficient for the green economy. Let's go further. Let's make it harder, or should I say more expensive, for companies to buy these products from China rather than here or from, Mexico and nearby countries, right?
Yep.
Does that make sense? To me, it
It
kind of all goes in the same direction.
it makes sense. There's a heck of a lot you mentioned there, which we can unpack on a number of these things. I think the overall context here is that America is basically trying to protect its interests, and it's as simple as that, right? And they're looking at the deficit, and you mentioned the deficit, and I think if we talk about the deficit for a moment, I don't remember the exact figures, but the US is buying somewhere north of $400 billion worth of goods from China per year. I think that's right. And China in return is
Mm.
buying somewhere around 140 billion worth of goods from the States.
Yeah,
So you can do
huge
the
trade deficit.
math. That's a
Mm.
massive trade deficit. And so the Americans, and this is definitely going to be happening with other countries as well, where there's a trade deficit to China, because I think the States isn't alone in that.
Yep.
But they're saying, well, hang on, you're accruing huge wealth and huge investment into your country through this trade deficit. But in return, yeah, we're buying stuff. But actually, now we're seeing that our own economy has been affected. We've got people who are lost jobs because of this. And we're relying on you for products and
Mm.
materials which are important to our national security, or maybe, like you were mentioning, masks, syringes, things like that. Well, health crises are kind of to do with national security, but I think national security, health, and employment overall, these are the three sort of sticking points with the states, right? And I guess the difference between a country like the US and the UK is, in the UK, it's a very small country with a relatively small population, whereas in the US, it's a large country and they do have a large population. Potentially, they could bring some of this stuff in-house, or at least be buying, as you mentioned, from friendly countries. So I think context-wise, I get why the trade deficit is a problem. What are China saying about this, though?
Well, China says, "Oh, but you guys were sort of promoting, the GATT and then the WTO, World Trade Organization, and there's rules and there's like a sort of tribunal and everything, and now you just unilaterally, making up your own rules, and you don't care about these institutions, but what like there's no legitimacy. This is ridiculous." And then, well, if you do that, we'll just hit back tit for tat, right? But they are very big on saying, hey, this you guys put in place some, international institutions, and there's some rules, and you guys sign, and you're not playing by the rules. What's going on here? It's an interesting approach, and what the America, at least in the Trump team, people like Bob Lighthizer, who used to be the U.S. Trade representative
Hmm.
during Trump's presidency, say, well, the GATT was okay, but he would not say okay because he just doesn't really like free trade that much anyway. But the WTO morphed into some kind of monster, and the judges there are ridiculous, and they can count on them. And this is just not an institution that we want to work with. It's some kind of monster. I think it's in Geneva in Switzerland, and it just doesn't work. It's just not effective. We can't work with it. Forget it. And the second thing he says is that the U.S. is sort of in a special position because of the dollar, because most of the countries, if they have an enormous trade deficit, will see their money, their currency depreciate naturally. And they say, well, in the US, we want to play by the market mechanisms, and we would like the US dollar to depreciate accordingly to give us more price competitiveness. But the problem is the US is a reserve currency, and a lot of people still buy the US dollar, irrespective of what's going on in the economy. And so it doesn't, its value doesn't go down, and it doesn't give us the extra competitiveness. Actually, it's too strong. It hampers our ability to export our products, right? So the market forces are just not working well for us. We can't just let the market forces take care of it, right? And
Hmm.
they have a bunch of, reasons. They've been thinking about that, and some of the reasons actually kind of make sense, right? Looking at it from their point of view, it does make sense, right?
Hmm.
So you say, well, tariff is great, provides tax revenue,
It sure
and
does.
it makes the products from that other country more expensive, but it can be more or less targeted by
Hmm.
product categories. So it's a nice weapon that they like to use.
Well, I suppose it's kind of like engineering the price of Chinese products to be where you think they need to be in the case of the Americans? Because
Mhm.
they're saying that Chinese products are artificially cheap, right? And that means that their American products or products from, other countries can't compete with that. And we see time and time again, it is difficult to compete with the Chinese on price and maybe not even on the cheapest products. If we look at the rise of the Chinese EV now, these aren't necessarily poor quality vehicles. Actually, they're some of the best in the world, right? But they're still going to be cheaper than Western
Mm.
brands.
Yeah, I mean, best in the world at what criteria, right? On the criteria that a lot of buyers value for EVs, yeah, some of them are very well positioned,
Mm.
right? For sure. Coming back to the news of this week, then is yeah. So what are the tariffs here? So
Mm.
uh, what's her name? Catherine Tai, yeah,
Yep.
is the U.S. trade representative. So she's the one who is in the job that Bob Lighthizer, that I mentioned before, was occupying under the Trump administration. Okay, and she came up with some tariffs, and it was kind of expected. Okay, we knew that the market for the US was kind of getting closed for electric vehicles. And I think Chinese manufacturers never really dreamt so much about selling a million cars on the US market. They're much more interested in Western Europe and a lot of other markets, right? So they slapped a 100% tariff from this year, on electric vehicles. So electric vehicle shipped from whatever Shanghai to Los Angeles, beam, the cost will be doubled. Okay, so that leaves some breathing room to the Tesla, Rivian, and also Ford, GM, and so on, that make electric vehicle cars and hybrids and so on in the US, in Mexico, and Canada. So
Mm.
that's a big thing, but it's not just electric vehicles. There's also batteries. Okay, so lithium ion electric vehicle batteries tariff is up to 25%. Okay, so this is kind of an incentive for the local manufacturers to say, well, you still want to buy from China, it's going to be a bit more expensive. So maybe you should consider investing into, battery manufacturing facilities in North America, or somewhere else. But don't rely too much on China, right? They try
Mm.
to level the playing field a little bit. Okay. I'm not sure it's enough, but still, this is signaling, right? And on the other hand, we give you big subsidies, right? So that's one thing. Then there's also steel and aluminum products. So if you buy the steel that goes into the cars that you make in North America, if you buy that steel from China, again, pop, 25% tariff on that.
Mm.
So try to give a bit more work to the local steel mills, basically, and aluminum forgeries and so on. Okay.
Yep.
Going back to the batteries, the lithium ion batteries that are not for electric vehicles will also have a tariff of 25%, but starting in 2026. So again, this is signaling, right? If it's not for electric vehicles, no big hurry, no big problem, but you know that in a couple of years, anything coming from China will be 25% more expensive. Okay. So when you set up a new factory and you ramp it up over time and so on, the investors have to plan for the next 5 years, 10 years, and beyond, right? So, tariff coming up in 2 years, okay, that's something that they would definitely take into account. And then they keep, like, they go up in the supply chain, right? They say battery parts for non-lithium ion batteries. That can be anything that goes into a battery, right? I guess the PCBA, the electrolytes, the whatever, the copper, the
Yeah.
all kinds of things like that. Anything that goes into batteries. I guess it's specifically things that are specifically for batteries, but I'm not
Mm.
100% sure. It might be
Hmm.
anything that goes into batteries. I'm not too sure. Boom, 25% tariff now. Okay. And they also look at graphite, okay, natural graphite, in 2 years, 25% tariff. And they also have other critical minerals right now,
Mm.
today, 25% tariff. Also magnets, what they call permanent magnets, something very important in certain types of batteries. In 2 years, 25% tariff.
Mm.
Okay, so that's it for the EVs and their batteries. Some of the components that will go into these batteries, and also some other batteries not for EVs. Then they also hit on some other product categories. Again, it's not just about the EV. It's also about, let's say, being less dependent on China. So there's 25% tariff starting now on cranes, ship-to-shore cranes. Okay,
Mm.
because yeah, if they go into a serious conflict with China, they might have an issue with their ports, and ports are really a critical piece of infrastructure, right? So they want to stimulate the production of cranes, out of China. All right, that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
They also added tariff on semiconductors. Next year, 50%. Okay,
Mm.
so that's not negligible, right? So, hey, Intel, TSMC, and whoever, Samsung, yeah, come here, put together nice big factories. We give you big subsidies, and so we try to bring the, and we'll make it more expensive for people to buy semiconductors from China, right? Because China has been focused for I don't know, at least a dozen years on producing their own semiconductors, and it's been kind of a slow progress, and they're not very happy about their performance, and they keep pushing it and so on. Okay, so they don't have the leading edge semiconductor technologies yet, but with huge companies like Huawei pushing very hard, and SMIC and some others, they will get closer and closer to the technological limit, and who knows, maybe in 10 years they'll be leading. Who knows? It's definitely something that they are pouring billions into, right? So
Mm.
the US wants to avoid being, lagging behind China in that respect. Okay, and then what else? We're talking about the green economy with electric vehicles and batteries. Well, solar cells, whether or not assembled into modules, right? Solar cells, right now, 50% tariff.
Mm.
Well, that should help level the playing field a little bit, right? When you slap a
Mm.
50% tariff. And then the last kind of category is medical devices. So face masks, medical gloves, these kinds of products were in big demand during COVID, especially first and second quarter of 2020.
Yep.
Uh, Nobody could put their hands on that fast enough, and people get really frustrated with that, and they try to favor the emergence of a competition to China. Now, the 25% tariff, is it going to be sufficient? I'm not so sure. There's also syringes and needles, 50% tariff. Yeah, that should
Mm.
help because yeah, plastic injection molding and CNC machining and things like that. Okay, the 50% tariff should help. But when it comes to face masks, there's just so much installed capacity in China, and
Mm.
25% tariff is not going to make a big difference, I think. Medical
Mm.
gloves, well, yeah, it depends. If it's uh, the PVC gloves, yeah, maybe. But those made based on rubber and things like that, they are
Mm.
already nicely diversified. It's not just China. There's places in Thailand, Malaysia, etc., that turn up big volumes. So I'm not really
Yep.
sure. I don't really know that industry very well. So yeah, there you go.
Well, what's interesting about this list of tariffs
Mm,
is that it really does give you an indication of the direction that the States wants to go in industrially, because, you've got EVs, you've got batteries, you've got medical devices, some heavy industry
mhm.
such as the cranes and steel and aluminum. This is really, we want to become more self-sufficient in these industries because we don't want to rely on China for them. We've already spoken and written about how important lithium-ion batteries are. Nothing we use today basically doesn't have a lithium-ion battery, in terms of
Mm,
electronic gadgets, right? And
mm.
so many are
Yeah,
coming from China. Well, what
really.
happens if that supply line gets cut off?
Right, right. Um, yeah, I would I would say things slightly differently. It's the categories where they see that if they let the current market forces, at play, China is going to really have the upper hand. Okay, and they feel that they are or are about to depend on China way too much. Okay, it doesn't mean that they want themselves to manufacture these things.
Mm,
Of course, it's better if they create the incentives for private companies to come and create a lot of jobs in the US and so on. Of course, they will be happy. But
mm,
hey, if it's made in Mexico, no big issue. Now, that's the current administration, right?
mm.
I think Trump has said that, oh, if Chinese car companies invest in Mexico because they think they can just sell into the US from Mexico, we'll just add a bunch of tariffs on them. We don't care, we're not dumb.
Mm.
So
I suppose
I
that does
think this,
kind of make sense. I don't agree with a lot of what Trump says, but if you're trying
mm,
to, tamp down on certain Chinese
mm,
industries, and then the Chinese go and set up a auto plant in Mexico and basically just sell
mm.
into you via Mexico, uh, why would you not also take action if that's the direction that you want to go in?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's if it's made in Mexico with a lot of content from China, right? A lot of value
Yeah,
added from China, presumably, it's not that different from buying from China.
no.
Um, well, in a way, right? If there is some kind of serious conflict between China and the US, then maybe, yeah, what if, it's the kind of things that they're probably talking about in Washington, D.C. Well, what
Mm.
if China suddenly cuts the supply of this to us, right?
Yep.
And if it's Chinese controlled Mexican factories receiving all the key materials from China, well, China cuts that and it's the same as if the US were relying directly on China. So that kind of makes sense.
Mm.
Kind of makes sense, yeah, in a way.
Talking about, like a hot conflict or something like that. I mean, this is let's hope that nothing like that happens, of course. But if the states are enacting these tariffs, which they are, right? I think first of all, what's the difference between Biden and Trump doing it? I've read that Biden, it's kind of like you said, he doesn't want Trump and his camp to say, "Oh, Biden and his
Mm,
administration are soft on China." So maybe
mm.
there's a political capital to be gained from doing this. Of course, the Chinese won't be happy to
Yeah.
be sort of piggy in the middle, but nonetheless, maybe that is a good reason why he's doing it if we look at it logically. But the Chinese, they're going to be somewhat punished in some key areas from this happening. If we look at the countries that are likely to be sort of supportive of measures like this. You've got the States, you've probably got the English speaking world in general, and maybe much of
Mm.
Europe as well. But that's a lot of the world left who are still going to be snapping up those, well priced Chinese products and materials that don't sort of come under the Western umbrella. So do China have enough market that they can just say, okay, fine, you guys don't want to buy as much from us. We're just going to sell and totally dominate the market everywhere else in the world.
Well, first, whatever the government thinks in Beijing, there's more and more very ambitious, really commercially aggressive Chinese private companies
Mm,
that are coming onto the scene and trying to export as much as they can. And of course, Beijing is favorable to that. It's been an export-led economy for more than 40 years now. So um, Beijing is Beijing is not going to tell their companies, oh, just stop selling to the US. Like over time, just reduce and reduce and like stop counting on that market. Eh, A lot of companies um, are selling so much to the US, they will keep trying to sell there anyway. So that's why the tariffs would just make it harder commercially, right? And we see more and more Chinese companies. They were investing a lot in Vietnam. Um, Now we see some of them have been investing in Mexico, and maybe later will be some other, I don't know, Central American countries or something. I'm
Yep.
not sure.
Yep.
Seems like they don't have that many options. Uh, but Chinese entrepreneurs are just going to keep going at it because it's just the way they do.
Yep.
They set up companies that are highly leveraged. They finance it. They go on heavy debt or whatever. Boom, they will put in place manufacturing capacity and they will try to open the markets. That's just the way that they have seen be successful, so successful with so many Chinese companies. They will keep doing that. They will keep doing that, whatever the government says it does, or except if it's really pretty extreme. I think
Mm.
there's no stopping that.
Okay. I've one more final question then. In light of these tariffs coming in, and these cover popular markets, right? These are not obscure products or materials or components.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an American business and you're buying from China now, what should you be thinking about in light of these tariffs?
Well, either you're in one of these categories or not, right? If you're in one of
Hmm.
these categories, then
Yeah.
go talk to your suppliers, negotiate. So, I can absorb 50% of that, but you guys have to absorb the other 50%, and this kind
Mm.
of negotiations. That's one thing. Okay. And if you're in one of these categories, well, yeah, you need to plan based on your situation, right? There's a lot of different situations. There's no one approach. If you're outside of these categories, well, look into that and ask yourself, are we um, are we in an exposed category? That
Mm.
politically is seen as important, yes or no? If I remember, when was that? About 1 year ago, I interviewed these two authors of a book called Enterprise China, right?
Yes.
I think that
Yeah,
was
that
the,
was a
the
good one.
title of the book. Hmm. And they say it very clearly, if you buy salt and pepper sets,
Yeah.
very,
Yeah, yeah,
very
yeah.
low tech kind of product,
No
or Dan
problem.
Harris, which we interviewed very recently, said
Mm.
rubber duckies, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This kind of stuff in Washington D.C. they don't care about that, right?
Right.
You can buy your rubber duckies or your salt and pepper set anywhere, no problem. Relying on China is not a problem, right? So if that's what you buy, what's the problem, right?
Mm.
But if you're anywhere close to, yeah, batteries, semiconductors, electric vehicles, things of that nature, well, well, you're gonna have your cake and eat it. Like
Mm.
what's his name? Musk has been managing so far. How long is Musk going to manage to have Tesla, being more or less accepted in China, and also selling his cars pretty much all over the world, and selling so
Mm.
many of them in the US, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, look back at that list. Are you on the list? Because this is where China has massively invested, where they tend to have a massive cost advantage and sometimes also technological advantage. And that's where other countries are going to say, hey guys, sorry, this is too much. This is too
Yeah.
much. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And if you're unsure, you can reach out to us and have a chat with us. We'll be happy to help. Just get in touch at sofeast.com. But yeah, that's a good list. And I'll include the links to, well, actually the official US Gov policy announcement. So you've got the full list there. And also there was a couple of other articles that we've sort of referred to as well. So definitely some interesting reading there for American listeners in particular. But yeah, good one. Important to keep abreast of these things because these are not insignificant announcements. Just going back to EVs, 100% tariff starting basically now on Chinese EVs. This is not small beer.
yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, worth knowing, and that's a good one. Next week, I think you're discussing actually near sourcing versus buying from China. So somewhat related.
Yep, it is. Yes, yes, with Frederick Grunquist, that we have interviewed a few times. So yeah, they've been working on putting together a database of European, Turkish, and Mexican manufacturers. So he shares some of his learnings with us.
Yeah, so that's going to be a good one, especially if sourcing's on your mind and you're thinking about the sorts of destinations where you can source products from. That'll be a good one. So tune in for that one next week. But that's the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me today, Renaud.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share because it will really help others discover us too.